I pulled into my driveway after a 12-hour shift at the hospital, my scrub still smelling faintly of antiseptic, and found a bright orange sticker plastered across my driver's side window. The words, "Unauthorized parking vehicle subject to immediate towing," screamed at me in bold letters, and I felt my exhausted brain struggle to process what I was seeing. This was my house, my driveway, my car, and somehow it was unauthorized. My name is Samuel Zimmerman, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Estates development in Scottsdale, Arizona, for exactly 3 months. The house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch that I had saved for years to buy, working double shifts as an emergency room nurse to afford even this much. The neighborhood seemed perfect when I toured it. Quiet streets, well-maintained homes, and a community pool I had yet to use. What the realtor had glossed over, however, was the iron-fisted rule of the homeowners association, led by a woman named Patricia, who seemed to have made it her life's mission to make everyone else miserable. I peeled the sticker off my window with shaking hands, leaving behind a sticky residue that would take forever to clean. The notice cited some obscure section of the HOA bylaws about vehicles being parked improperly in driveways. I looked at my Honda Civic, parked perfectly straight, well within the boundaries of my own property, and felt anger bubbling up through my exhaustion. The next morning, after barely 4 hours of sleep, I marched over to Patricia's house 3 doors down. She answered wearing a velour tracksuit and holding a small yappy dog that immediately started barking at me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she would rather do anything but help me. "Yes. You can explain why my car was threatened with towing when it was parked in my own driveway," I said, holding up the orange sticker. Patricia's lips pursed into a tight line. "Mr. Zimmerman, if you had bothered to read the HOA regulations you signed, you would know that all vehicles must be parked facing forward in driveways. Your vehicle was backed in, which is a clear violation." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "You're joking." "I never joke about community standards," she said. "The rules exist for a reason. They maintain property values and aesthetic harmony. It's a parked car. It looks the same from either direction. The rules are the rules, Mr. Zimmerman. Next time, your vehicle will be towed at your expense. Have a good day." She closed the door in my face. I stood there for a solid minute, trying to process the absurdity. I had dealt with combative patients, grieving families, and life-or-death situations in the emergency room, but somehow this felt more surreal than any of that. Over the next 2 weeks, I made sure to park facing forward, as ridiculous as I found the rule. But Patricia seemed to have developed a special interest in my property. I received violation notices for my trash cans being visible from the street after 6 in the morning on non-collection days. For a small garden gnome, my sister had given me as a housewarming gift that apparently violated the lawn ornament restrictions, and for my grass being 1 inch taller than the maximum allowed height. Each violation came with a $50 fine. When I called to dispute them, I got a voicemail system that never returned calls. When I tried to attend an HOA meeting to address the issues in person, I was told homeowners could only speak during the public comment period, which had been temporarily suspended due to time constraints. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning. I had worked a brutal overnight shift, dealing with a multi-vehicle accident that had brought in 7 patients, 2 of whom we lost despite our best efforts. I came home at dawn, pulled into my driveway facing forward, and collapsed into bed. 4 hours later, I was jolted awake by a loud beeping sound. I stumbled to my window and saw a tow truck backing up to my car. I ran outside in my pajama pants and t-shirt, barefoot on the hot Arizona pavement. "Hey, what are you doing?" I shouted. The tow truck driver, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, paused and checked his clipboard. "Got a call from the HOA. Vehicle parked in violation of community standards." "That's my car in my driveway, parked exactly how they told me to park it," he shrugged sympathetically. "Look, buddy, I just do what I'm told. The HOA contracted us to enforce parking violations. You'll need to take it up with them." "I'm taking it up with you. That's my property. You can't just tow it." "Actually, I can. You signed an HOA agreement that gives them the authority. It's all legal." He started walking back to his truck. Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. Maybe it was the months of petty harassment. Or maybe it was watching two people die just hours earlier and realizing life was too short to let small-minded people push you around. "What's the name of your company?" I called out. "Desert Valley Towing," he said. "We've had the contract with Meadowbrook Estates HOA for about 5 years now." I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, my hands trembling with exhaustion and anger. The driver looked uncomfortable, but proceeded to hook up my car anyway. I called the non-emergency police line, but they told me it was a civil matter and they couldn't intervene in HOA disputes. $250 later, I retrieved my car from an impound lot on the edge of town. The attendant there gave me a receipt and mentioned, almost casually, that Desert Valley Towing was a small operation, just the owner and 3 drivers, doing mostly HOA and parking enforcement work. That night, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion, I did something impulsive. I started researching Desert Valley Towing. It turned out the company was owned by a man named Gerald Peck, who had been running it for 15 years. A few more searches revealed that Gerald was 68 years old and had recently listed the business for sale. The asking price was $120,000. I had $130,000 in savings. It represented years of overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and living frugally. I had been planning to use it for a down payment on a bigger house someday, or maybe for starting my own clinic. Using it to buy a towing company seemed insane, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense in a twisted way. Patricia and the HOA had weaponized Desert Valley Towing against the residents. What if I owned that weapon? What if I could defang their primary means of harassment? The next morning, running on pure spite and 2 cups of coffee, I called the number listed in the business sale advertisement. Gerald Peck answered on the 3rd ring, his voice rough with age and decades of cigarette smoking. "Yeah, Desert Valley Towing. Hi, my name is Samuel Zimmerman. I saw your business is for sale. I'd like to discuss purchasing it." There was a pause. "You serious? You know anything about the towing business?" "I'm a quick learner. I have the cash ready." "When can we meet?" We met that afternoon at a diner off Route 202. Gerald was a barrel-chested man with sun-damaged skin and suspicious eyes. He looked me over like I was trying to scam him. "You're a nurse?" he asked after I explained my background. "Emergency room. I work at Phoenix General. And you want to buy a towing company because..." I decided honesty was the best approach. "Your company towed my car from my own driveway yesterday under orders from my HOA. I'm tired of being pushed around, and I have the money to do something about it." Gerald leaned back and laughed, a wheezing sound that turned into a cough. "That's the best reason I've heard in months. Most people who inquire want to know about profit margins and growth potential. You just want revenge. I want control of my own situation, and yes, maybe a little revenge." "Patricia call the hit on you?" he asked. "You know her?" "Everyone in the towing business knows Patricia. She's got 5 HOAs under her belt. She's on the board of 3 of them, president of 2. That woman has made me more money over the years than every bar and nightclub in Scottsdale combined." He took a sip of his coffee. "She's also the reason I'm selling." "What do you mean?" Gerald's expression darkened. "She wanted me to start towing cars for more and more ridiculous violations. Wanted me to patrol neighborhoods and look for anything she could find people for. I'm getting too old to be harassing regular folks who are just trying to live their lives. I told her last month I was done with the HOA contracts after this year. She threatened to sue me for breach of contract. I decided it was time to retire and let it be someone else's problem. The contract between Desert Valley and the HOA, what are the terms? Renews annually. Current term ends in 4 months. If you buy the business, you inherit all existing contracts, including the 6 HOAs we service. But here's the thing, kid, you can also choose not to renew them. The contract goes both ways. An idea was forming in my mind, but I needed more information. How much of your business is HOA work? About 60%. The rest is parking enforcement for a few strip malls, some recovery work, and occasional roadside assistance. You'd take a hit if you dropped the HOA contracts, but you wouldn't go under. We spent the next 2 hours going over the details. Gerald had 3 drivers on payroll, 2 trucks that were fully paid off, 1 truck that still had payments, and a small office with a dispatch system. The business was profitable, if not spectacularly so. He was asking $120,000, but after some negotiation, we agreed on $115,000 with $10,000 down, and the rest financed over 3 years. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers," Gerald said. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious." We shook hands. I spent the drive home wondering if I had lost my mind. I was a nurse, not a businessman. I knew nothing about towing, dispatch systems, or managing employees. But I also knew that I was tired of feeling powerless, and this felt like taking power back. The sale went through faster than I expected. Gerald was motivated to retire, and I was motivated by spite. 3 weeks after that first meeting, I signed a stack of papers at a lawyer's office and became the owner of Desert Valley Towing. Gerald agreed to stay on for 2 weeks to train me and introduce me to the drivers. The drivers were an interesting bunch. Marcus was a 35-year-old former mechanic who treated the trucks like his children. Linda was a tough-as-nails woman in her 40s who had been in the towing business for 20 years and took no grief from anyone. Jake was a younger guy, maybe 26, who was working his way through college and treated towing as a job rather than a career. "So you're the new boss," Linda said when we met. "Gerald says you bought the company because Patricia had your car towed. Word travels fast." "It's a small industry. That true?" "It's true," she grinned. "Good. I like you already. Patricia's been a pain in everyone's rear for years. Gerald was too old to fight her, but maybe you're not." I spent the next 2 weeks learning everything I could. How to operate the dispatch system, the legal requirements for towing in Arizona, the contracts with various HOAs and businesses, and the day-to-day operations of keeping trucks running and drivers paid. I kept my nursing shifts, working 3 12-hour shifts per week at the hospital, and spent my other days running the towing company. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. For the first time since moving into Meadowbrook Estates, I felt like I had some control. The first test came 2 months into ownership. I was in the office, which was a small building near downtown Scottsdale that desperately needed a fresh coat of paint, when Patricia called. "Desert Valley Towing, this is Sam speaking." "Sam, where's Gerald?" Patricia's voice was sharp. "Gerald retired. I bought the company." There was a long pause. You're the one who bought it." "That's right." "Well, I have a job for you. There's a vehicle at 2847 Meadowbrook Lane parked on the street overnight. That's a violation. I need it towed immediately. I pulled up the address on my computer. That was Tom Henderson's house, 4 doors down from mine. Tom was a teacher who drove a beat-up Ford Explorer. I had talked to him a few times. Nice guy, coached Little League on weekends. What's the violation specifically? I asked. Street parking is prohibited between midnight and 6 a.m. It's in the bylaws, and it's currently. I checked the time, 10 in the morning. The violation occurred last night. I documented it with photographs. The vehicle needs to be towed as a penalty. Miss Patricia, I'm looking at our contract with Meadowbrook Estates HOA. It specifies that we tow vehicles that are currently in violation and pose a safety hazard or are currently parked illegally. It doesn't say anything about retroactive towing for violations that are no longer occurring. That's not how we've done things with Gerald. I'm not Gerald. Her voice could have frozen water. Mr. Zimmerman, we have a contract. If you refuse to fulfill the terms, the HOA will be forced to take legal action and find another towing company. You're welcome to review the contract with your lawyer. I've reviewed it with mine. I'm happy to tow vehicles that are currently in violation, but I'm not going to tow someone's car from their driveway because they parked on the street last night. That's harassment, not enforcement. She hung up without another word. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. I had just declared war on Patricia, and she was not going to take it well. Over the next few weeks, Patricia tested me repeatedly. She called with increasingly petty towing requests, which I denied. She sent certified letters threatening breach of contract. She even showed up at my office once, demanding to speak to me in person. "You're destroying this neighborhood," she said, her face red with anger. "Rules exist for a reason. Property values depend on standards." "Property values depend on people wanting to live here," I replied. "And nobody wants to live in a neighborhood where they're constantly harassed and threatened." "This isn't over," she said. She was right. It wasn't over. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening. I had never been allowed to speak at one before, but now I had leverage. I showed up 15 minutes early and took a seat in the back of the community center meeting room. About 20 other homeowners were scattered throughout the room, most looking tired and resigned. Patricia sat at the front table with 4 other board members. She saw me come in, and her expression could have curdled milk. The meeting started with standard business: approval of the previous meeting's minutes, discussion of landscaping contracts, and a vote on repaving the community tennis courts. Then came the section I was waiting for: violations and enforcement. "We've had a significant decrease in towing enforcement over the past 2 months," Patricia said, directing her comments to the board but clearly speaking for my benefit. "This has resulted in multiple violations going unpunished and a general degradation of community standards." One of the other board members, a man named Richard, nodded. "What's the cause of the decrease?" "Change in ownership of our towing contractor. The new owner is refusing to enforce violations according to our previous arrangement." "Is the new owner present?" Richard asked. I stood up. "I am." "Samuel Zimmerman, owner of Desert Valley Towing." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Zimmerman lives in the community. This is a clear conflict of interest." "I wasn't aware that living in the community I serve was a conflict of interest," I said. "I thought it meant I had a personal stake in seeing things run fairly." "This isn't the public comment period," Patricia snapped. "You brought up my company. I have a right to respond," I said. "I'm happy to continue our contract with Meadowbrook Estates HOA, but I will only tow vehicles that are currently in violation of actual safety or legal issues. I won't tow cars as punishment for past violations that are no longer occurring. That's not towing. That's harassment." Several homeowners in the audience started murmuring. A woman near the front raised her hand. "Yes, Susan," Richard acknowledged her. "I'd just like to say that I appreciate Mr. Zimmerman's approach. I was fined $200 last year because my son's car was towed from my driveway while he was visiting. He had parked facing the wrong direction. That felt excessive." Another man stood up. "My car was towed because I left it on the street for 2 hours on a Sunday morning while I was unloading groceries. Cost me $300 total. If Mr. Zimmerman is willing to be more reasonable, I support that." Patricia's face was turning purple. "These rules were voted on and approved by the community." "Were they?" I asked. "Because I've been trying to get copies of the actual voting records and meeting minutes where these rules were supposedly approved, and the HOA office keeps telling me they're not available." "That's because you haven't filed the proper request forms," Patricia said. "I've filed 3 separate request forms using the exact format specified in the bylaws. All 3 have been ignored." Richard looked uncomfortable. "Patricia, we should probably provide those records if he's following the proper procedure." "This is derailing the meeting," Patricia said. "We'll address Mr. Zimmerman's concerns at a later date. For now, I move that we terminate our contract with Desert Valley Towing and seek bids from other companies." "I second," said another board member, an older woman named Helen who seemed to follow Patricia's lead on everything. "All in favor?" Patricia asked. 3 hands went up: Patricia, Helen, and a younger man whose name I didn't know. Richard and the 5th board member, a quiet woman named Marie, abstained. Motion carries. Our contract with Desert Valley Towing will be terminated in accordance with the 30-day notice period specified in the agreement. Meeting adjourned. I left the community center feeling oddly relieved. The contract with Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, represented about 15% of my business. Losing it would hurt, but it wouldn't kill me. And now I didn't have to deal with Patricia's constant harassment. But Patricia wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. The following week, I received a notice that I was being fined $5,000 for operating a commercial business from a residential property. The notice claimed that because I owned Desert Valley Towing and lived in Meadowbrook Estates, I was in violation of the covenants prohibiting home-based businesses. I called the lawyer who had handled the business purchase. Her name was Jennifer Shaw, and she was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in small business law. "This is ridiculous," Jennifer said after I read her the notice. "You don't operate the business from your home. You have an office in Scottsdale. You just own the business." That's what I thought, but the notice says ownership constitutes operation. It doesn't. That's not how any of this works. You could own 100 businesses and live there. As long as you're not conducting business activities from the residence, you're fine. She paused. "This is targeted harassment. Do you have documentation of all your interactions with the HOA? I've been keeping everything." "Good. Keep it all. If this continues, we might need to file a lawsuit for harassment. But let's start by responding to this fine with a strongly worded letter explaining why it's baseless." Jennifer sent the letter. Patricia responded by scheduling a hearing before the HOA board to discuss the violation. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, I focused on running the towing company. With the Meadowbrook Estates contract terminated, I reached out to other businesses. I landed a contract with a large shopping center that was having problems with people parking overnight in their lot. I also started offering more roadside assistance services, which were more lucrative and far less morally complicated than HOA enforcement. Marcus, Linda, and Jake were all supportive of the new direction. Linda especially seemed relieved to be done with HOA work. I hated those calls. she admitted one afternoon while we were in the office. Half the time, the people weren't doing anything actually wrong. They were just living their lives, and some busybody with too much time decided to make it a problem. How much of our HOA business was like that? I asked. Most of it. The Meadowbrook Estates contract was the worst, but the others weren't much better. There are a couple of HOAs we work with that are reasonable. They call us for actual problems like abandoned vehicles or cars blocking emergency access. But those are the minority. What if we only kept those contracts? The reasonable ones, Linda shrugged. We'd make less money, but we'd sleep better. Your call, boss. I thought about it. I was still working at the hospital, pulling in a steady income from nursing. The towing company didn't have to be a massive profit center. It could be sustainable and ethical, which felt more important over the next month. As the various HOA contracts came up for renewal, I let most of them lapse. I kept two that had reasonable enforcement policies and focused on building up the commercial and roadside assistance side of the business. Revenue dipped, but not as much as I had feared. Turned out there was decent money in helping stranded motorists and providing legitimate parking enforcement for businesses. The hearing before the HOA board was a joke. Patricia and her allies had clearly made up their minds before I even walked in. They upheld the $5,000 fine and added another $1,000 for frivolous legal challenges because I had my lawyer send the response letter. This is extortion, Jennifer said after I told her the outcome. They're punishing you for standing up to them. What are my options? We file a lawsuit. We go after them for harassment, abuse of power, and potentially fraud if we can prove they've been misappropriating HOA funds. But litigation is expensive and time-consuming. How expensive? Could be $20,000, $30,000 in legal fees, maybe more if it drags out. I thought about it. I had already spent $115,000 buying a towing company out of spite. What was another $30,000 to fight back properly? Do it, I said. Jennifer filed the lawsuit 2 weeks later. We sued Patricia personally and the HOA board as an entity, alleging harassment, abuse of power, selective enforcement of rules, and failure to follow proper procedures. We included documentation of all the petty violations, the towing of my car from my own driveway, the refusal to provide meeting minutes and voting records, and the retaliatory fines after I bought the towing company. The lawsuit got attention. A local newspaper picked up the story, running a piece titled, "Homeowner Fights Back Against HOA Overreach." The reporter interviewed me, several other homeowners who had similar experiences with Patricia, and even got a quote from Gerald, who said he was glad someone was finally standing up to her. Patricia responded by escalating. She filed a countersuit claiming defamation and attempted to place a lien on my house for the unpaid fines. Jennifer blocked the lien, arguing that the fines were being disputed in court and couldn't be enforced until the matter was resolved. The whole thing was spiraling into a mess, but I was too deep to back out now. I had become a symbol for frustrated homeowners throughout the neighborhood, and people were watching to see what would happen. Discovery in the lawsuit turned up some interesting information. Jennifer subpoenaed the HOA's financial records and meeting minutes going back 5 years. What we found was damning. Patricia had been approving payments to herself for consulting fees that were never properly disclosed to the homeowners. She had awarded contracts to her brother-in-law's landscaping company at rates well above market value. And most importantly, many of the rules she had been enforcing so zealously had never actually been properly voted on by the membership. She had simply added them to the bylaws on her own authority. "This is fraud," Jennifer said when we reviewed the documents. "She's been treating the HOA like her personal piggy bank and fiefdom." Is this criminal? It could be. We're talking about potential embezzlement. You might want to consider filing a police report. I thought about it carefully. Taking Patricia to civil court was one thing. Getting her arrested was another level entirely. But if she had actually been stealing money from the homeowners, didn't they deserve to know? I talked to some of the other homeowners before making a decision. Tom Henderson, the teacher, was unequivocal. Turn her in, he said. I've been paying HOA dues for 7 years. If she's been stealing that money, I want her held accountable. Susan, the woman who had spoken up at the meeting, agreed. She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. If she broke the law, she should face the consequences. I filed a police report the next day. The Scottsdale Police Department's white-collar crime unit took the case. Detective Maria Rodriguez was assigned to investigate. She was a serious woman in her early 40s who reviewed our evidence with a careful eye. This is a good start, she said, but we'll need to do our own investigation to build a criminal case. That could take months. I understand. In the meantime, don't discuss the criminal investigation with anyone except your lawyer. Let us do our work. The investigation moved slowly, as these things do. In the meantime, the civil lawsuit continued. Patricia tried to have the case dismissed, but the judge denied her motion. Discovery continued, and the evidence kept piling up. The turning point came 4 months into the lawsuit. Detective Rodriguez contacted me and asked me to come to the station. When I arrived, she had a satisfied look on her face. "We've completed our investigation," she said. "We found evidence of embezzlement totaling approximately $78,000 over the past 5 years. We've also found evidence of kickback schemes with several contractors. We're moving forward with criminal charges." "What kind of charges?" "Theft, fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty." She's looking at potential prison time if convicted. Patricia was arrested the following week. The local news covered it, and the story blew up. It turned out Patricia had been pulling similar schemes in the other HOAs she controlled. Homeowners from multiple communities came forward with complaints and evidence. The HOA board at Meadowbrook Estates held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patricia from her position. They also voted to drop all fines against me and several other homeowners who had been targeted for retaliatory enforcement. The civil lawsuit settled a month later. The HOA's insurance agreed to pay $50,000 to cover my legal fees and compensate me for the harassment. Patricia was personally ordered to pay an additional $25,000, though I doubted I would ever see that money. The criminal case took longer. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney and fought the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. She eventually took a plea deal, pleading guilty to felony theft and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all the HOAs she had defrauded. The whole saga took almost 2 years from start to finish. In that time, my life changed in ways I never expected. Desert Valley Towing grew steadily. Without the HOA contracts, I focused on building a reputation for fair and professional service. We became known as the towing company that actually cared about helping people rather than gouging them. Business was good, and I was able to hire 2 more drivers. I eventually cut back my nursing hours to per diem status, working just enough shifts to maintain my license and skills. I discovered that I actually enjoyed running a business, especially one that felt ethical. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA underwent a complete transformation. New board members were elected, people who actually wanted to serve the community rather than control it. They revised the bylaws, eliminating many of the petty rules Patricia had implemented. They instituted proper financial oversight and transparent reporting. The neighborhood became a genuinely pleasant place to live. People stopped being afraid of violating obscure rules and started actually talking to each other. Block parties happened. Kids played in the streets. It felt like a real community. I even started seeing someone, a woman named Olivia Martinez who lived 2 streets over. She was a graphic designer who worked from home, and we met at one of the new neighborhood barbecues. She had been one of Patricia's victims too, fined repeatedly for having unapproved flowers in her front garden. "You're kind of a neighborhood hero," she said on our 3rd date. "I'm really not," I said. "I just got mad and did something impulsive." "You bought a towing company out of spite and ended up exposing a criminal. That's pretty heroic." "It was expensive spite," she laughed. "The best kind." A year after Patricia's conviction, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA approached me with a proposal. They wanted to hire Desert Valley Towing again, but under completely different terms. Instead of enforcement-focused towing, they wanted us on call for legitimate issues only: abandoned vehicles, cars blocking emergency access, things like that. I agreed, but with strict conditions documented in the contract. We would only tow vehicles that posed actual safety hazards or were in violation of city laws, not HOA bylaws. All towing requests had to be approved by at least 2 board members, not just one person. And homeowners had the right to appeal any towing within 24 hours. It worked well. In the first year of the renewed contract, we towed exactly 4 vehicles from Meadowbrook Estates. 3 were actually abandoned, and 1 was blocking a fire hydrant. No complaints, no harassment, no drama. I eventually sold my house in Meadowbrook Estates, not because I was unhappy there, but because Olivia and I decided to move in together. We bought a place in Phoenix proper, a mid-century modern home with no HOA at all. The freedom was intoxicating. Desert Valley Towing continued to grow. We expanded into vehicle recovery and transportation services. Marcus was promoted to operations manager, and Linda became our lead trainer for new drivers. Jake finished his degree and moved on to a career in engineering, but he still called occasionally to say he missed the towing days. I kept nursing on a per diem basis, working about 1 shift per week. I had come to realize I enjoyed the variety of doing both. The hospital kept me grounded in direct service and human connection. The business gave me autonomy and the satisfaction of building something. Looking back, buying that towing company was one of the craziest decisions I ever made. It was impulsive, expensive, and risky. I could have just paid the towing fee, kept my head down, and dealt with Patricia's harassment like everyone else, but something in me refused to accept that. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was a sense of justice, or maybe it was just being tired of feeling powerless. Whatever it was, it led me down a path I never expected. I learned a lot through the experience. I learned that standing up to bullies is hard and expensive, but ultimately worth it. I learned that systems of petty power often hide larger corruption. I learned that communities thrive when people look out for each other instead of trying to control each other. I also learned that spite, when properly channeled, can be a powerful motivator. Not the healthiest lesson, perhaps, but an effective one. Patricia got out of prison after serving 22 months of her 3-year sentence. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to another state to live with her daughter. Several civil lawsuits from other homeowners and HOAs were still pending against her. I doubted she would ever be in a position of power again. The whole experience left me with a complicated relationship with HOAs. I understood the original purpose: maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood improvements, protecting property values. But I had seen firsthand how easily that power could be abused when the wrong person got control. These days, when people ask me about buying a house in an HOA community, I tell them to do their homework. Read the bylaws carefully. Attend a few board meetings before you buy. Talk to current residents. Look for red flags like secretive finances, selective enforcement, or board members who have been in power for many years without challenge. And if you do end up in a bad HOA situation, I tell them they have options. They can run for the board themselves. They can organize with other homeowners to vote in changes. They can hire a lawyer if the harassment rises to an illegal level. They can even, if they're feeling particularly spiteful and have the resources, buy the towing company. That last one usually gets a laugh, but I'm only half joking. Desert Valley Towing still operates today, 7 years after I bought it from Gerald. We have 8 trucks now and 15 employees. We're known throughout the Phoenix metro area as the ethical towing company, the one that treats people fairly and only tows when legitimately necessary. I still get calls occasionally from homeowners in other communities dealing with their own versions of Patricia. I share my story and offer what advice I can. Sometimes, I refer them to Jennifer, who has built a thriving practice representing homeowners in HOA disputes. A few times, I have been tempted to buy other towing companies that have abusive contracts with HOAs, just to defang them the same way I did with Desert Valley. But Olivia talks me down from those impulses. You can't save everyone, she says. You did your part. Let other people fight their own battles. She is right, of course, but the temptation is always there. Olivia and I got married 3 years ago in a small ceremony at a botanical garden in Phoenix. Marcus, Linda, and several of my nurses from the hospital attended. Even Gerald came, looking healthier than when I first met him, retirement apparently agreeing with him. Best decision I ever made selling to you, he told me at the reception. I just wanted to get out from under Patricia. I never imagined you would take her down completely. I didn't plan it that way, I said. It just kind of happened. The best revenge usually does, he said with a grin. We have a good life now, Olivia and I. She runs her design business from our home office. I split my time between Desert Valley Towing and occasional nursing shifts. We have 2 dogs, a garden that would have given Patricia an aneurysm with its complete lack of conformity, and neighbors who we actually like because nobody is enforcing petty rules on anyone. Sometimes I drive through Meadowbrook Estates, just to see how things are going. The neighborhood looks good, better than when I lived there. The streets are still clean and well-maintained, but now there is personality too. Garden gnomes dot some lawns. A few cars are parked backward in driveways. One house has a bright purple front door. It looks like a place where people actually live, not a sterile showroom designed to impress nobody in particular. I think about the version of myself who first pulled into that driveway 3 months after moving in, exhausted from a hospital shift and confronted with that orange towing sticker. That version of me had no idea what was coming, the lawsuits, the investigation, the complete transformation of my career and life. If I could go back and tell him what was ahead, I am not sure what I would say. It was exhausting and expensive and stressful. But it was also empowering and ultimately rewarding. It taught me that I had more strength than I realized, and that sometimes fighting back against petty tyrants is not just personally satisfying but serves a larger good. Would I recommend that everyone in a bad HOA situation buy a towing company out of spite? Absolutely not. It was a ridiculous solution to the problem, one that only worked because of specific circumstances and a fair amount of luck. But would I do it again? In a heartbeat. Because sometimes the most impulsive, spite-fueled decisions lead to the most important changes. Sometimes standing up to a bully, even in an unconventional way, sends ripples far beyond your own situation. And sometimes buying a towing company is exactly the right move, even if nobody, including yourself, saw it coming. Patricia tried to control a community through fear and petty enforcement. She weaponized rules and used a towing company as her instrument of harassment. In the end, that weapon was turned against her, not through some master plan, but through a tired nurse making an impulsive decision after one too many injustices. There is probably a lesson in there about poetic justice or the dangers of abusing power. But honestly, I just think it is a good reminder that you never know who you are pushing around. That exhausted person you are hassling might just have the resources and stubbornness to push back in ways you never anticipated. Today, Desert Valley Towing has a new motto that Linda suggested and everyone embraced. Fair service, every time. It is printed on all our trucks and business cards. It represents what we have become, a company that helps people rather than exploiting them, that enforces legitimate rules rather than petty power trips. We still do towing, of course. Cars break down, accidents happen, and yes, sometimes vehicles are genuinely parked where they should not be. But we do it with respect and fairness, charging reasonable rates and treating people like human beings rather than revenue sources. It turns out there is a market for that. People are willing to pay for service that treats them well. Businesses appreciate working with a company they can trust. Even the few HOAs we work with now value having a towing company that will not abuse residents on their behalf. The whole experience changed my perspective on a lot of things. I used to think that systems and rules were mostly neutral, that it was just about enforcing them fairly. Now, I understand that rules themselves can be weapons, that systems can be designed to oppress rather than serve, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to participate in an unjust system. I also learned that community matters. Throughout the lawsuit and investigation, I had support from other homeowners who were just as fed up with Patricia's reign. We banded together, shared information, and backed each other up. That solidarity made all the difference. And I learned that spite, while not the noblest motivation, can be a powerful catalyst for positive change. I did not set out to reform HOA governance in Scottsdale or to expose a criminal fraud scheme. I just wanted to stop being harassed. But by following through on that spite-fueled impulse, I ended up accomplishing something larger. These days, I occasionally speak at community meetings or homeowner association conferences, sharing my story and talking about the importance of accountability and fairness in community governance. It is strange being a minor expert on something I stumbled into accidentally, but people seem to appreciate hearing from someone who has been in the trenches. My message is usually simple. Read your HOA documents before you buy. Get involved in governance. Question authority when rules seem unreasonable. Document everything. Do not be afraid to fight back when fighting back is necessary. And remember that the people enforcing rules are your neighbors, not your rulers. Also, if you happen to know someone who owns a towing company and they are looking to retire, keep my number handy. You never know when that might come in useful. I am joking, mostly. But the truth is, my unlikely path from exhausted nurse to towing company owner to HOA reform advocate has shown me that there are always options, even when you feel powerless. You just have to be creative, stubborn, and maybe a little bit crazy. Olivia and I talk sometimes about what we would do differently if we could do it all over again. She thinks I should have just sold the house and moved immediately, avoiding all the stress and expense. She is probably right from a purely practical standpoint, but I do not regret it. Standing up to Patricia, exposing her corruption, and transforming both the towing company and the HOA were worth the cost. Not just for me, but for all the homeowners who are now living in a more reasonable community, and for all the people who now have access to a fair towing company when they need one. Sometimes doing the right thing is expensive and difficult. Sometimes it requires making impulsive decisions that do not make sense on paper. And sometimes it means turning your entire life upside down because you refuse to accept an unjust situation. But looking at where I ended up, at the life Olivia and I have built, at the business that serves people fairly, at the community that was reformed, I would say it was worth every dollar, every sleepless night, every moment of stress and uncertainty. Because at the end of the day, I can look at myself in the mirror and know that I stood up when it mattered. I refused to be bullied. I turned a weapon of harassment into a tool for fair service. And I helped send a message that abusing power has consequences, even in something as seemingly minor as a homeowners association. The orange sticker that started it all is framed in my office at Desert Valley Towing, a reminder of where everything began. When things get stressful or difficult, I look at it and remember that exhausted version of myself, standing in my driveway, deciding that enough was enough. That decision to fight back, to buy the towing company, to refuse to accept the status quo changed everything. It was impulsive and expensive and more than a little crazy. But it was also exactly what needed to happen for me, for my community, and for everyone who has ever felt powerless in the face of petty tyranny. So yes, HOA tried to tow my car, and I bought the towing company. And I would do it again in a heartbeat.